A warm welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us here on the morning show on ETV Namhlanje Ekseni. February is globally considered to be the month of love, which usually sees a spike, wait for it, in the number of engagements and marriages taking place. Now, against this background, it seems appropriate to now discuss engagements and the legal significance that they have under South African law. Joining you and I to talk live via Skype is the head of legal research at LegalWise, George Pelser, helping us to unpack all of this and more. A very good morning, George. We're going to jump straight into it. I mean, what exactly is an engagement, and are there certain requirements involved for it to be valid?
Yeah, morning, William. So when we look at an engagement, we're looking at it's at its core basis, it's an agreement between two people to get married at a future date. We have a lot of legislation dealing with marriages, in South Africa, we have 3 valid marriages, types of valid marriages, but there's no legislation dealing with engagements. And so when we have to look at the validity of an engagement and the legal consequences thereof, we have to boil it down to our common law and basically contractual law. So when we look at the requirements, as we discussed last month with contracts, there must be consensus. There must be consent. Both parties must agree to get engaged. If you are thinking you are marrying or you're getting engaged to person A, but through various misrepresentations and mistakes, you're actually getting married to person B, that scaly person behind the computer screen that you've never met probably. That means that there's a material mistake and that engagement is not valid thing. We also look at capacity. So both parties must have that mental capacity to consent to this engagement. And then we're looking at lawfulness and possibility of the engagement. And with that, just as an example, when you look at the requirements for the marriage, the law is very clear that close blood relations cannot get married, like a brother and a sister, for example. So when you pull that back to an engagement, a brother and sister will then not be able to get engaged because that marriage will never be able to happen. So with the requirements, we're looking at basic contractual law requirements, but also trying to pull back the requirements of a valid marriage just to get back to the validity of the engagement.
And obviously, touching on that conversation we had last time, George, we were talking about consent. I mean, when we talk about consent, is there an age limitation on who can get engaged?
As a general rule, when we deal with contracts, for example, only people over the age of 18 has that mental capacity to enter into valid contracts. And if they are below the age of 18, usually you need parental consent. So with engagements, it's a little bit different because when we look again, pulling the requirements of a marriage back, when we look at that, there are certain instances where minor children under the age of 18 can get married with their parental consent. So with that, it means that if you pull that through, that even minor children under the age of 18 can get engaged. They don't need parental consent to get engaged. But if they get to the point of getting married, that will be a problem then, because if the parents don't consent to that, then the engagement couldn't actually exist at that stage because the marriage would not be possible. So there's no actual age limitation, but it can be blocked at a later stage when they want to get married.
And just on the back of that, George, I mean, is an engagement a prerequisite before getting married or not?
When you look at that, there's no tick box to tick to say that were the people engaged before they get to this point. So it's not actually a legal requirement for a valid marriage. There's no duration. There's no law specifically saying that you have to be engaged for 1 year before getting married. Or, some people will decide today, let's get married. There's no ring involved. There's nothing. They just get married, go to Home Affairs and get married, for example. So it's not a legal requirement, but indirectly, it is that first step of, the couple agreeing to say that, okay, let's get married, and then they go through the process.
Let's talk about this important issue, George. I mean, what happens and what are the consequences if the engagement does not work out?
So when we look at this, it is important to think about expenses that were going to be incurred for the wedding. And it's important to agree at the beginning of the engagement as to who will be responsible. And try and anticipate for the breakdown of the marriage, of the engagement, for example. what will happen then? Well, you have to reimburse the other party as well for the expenses if you were at fault for breaking off the engagement. If we look at the engagement as a contract, it can be seen as a breach of contract. However, the law has been changing in moving away from the breach of contract type of argument, because in the past, you could claim for like humiliation, for example, in the breach of promise to marriage. So, when the engagement was broken up. And the law, some high courts have said that this is not possible anymore, taking the social society and the changes in our society as well into account, that it's not something that you can necessarily claim for. But you can still look into your actual expenses, your actual damages that you suffer. If you think about an example, it's the day before the marriage, everything has been paid, everything has been done, and then one of the parties comes and says, I can't do this anymore, I'm sorry. Your first instinct would be that, I want you to compensate me for the expenses I've done. And it is possible. However, you have to look at quite a lot of factors, before getting into that. And at most instances, the couple usually settles and say, okay, I understand it was partly my fault. I will pay half of it, or, in that instance. So it is possible. Just another legal consequence I want to just quickly touch on. It's the duty of, so when you are engaged, unlike with the marriage, there's no legal duty to support each other. So I have heard and read about this before, where an engagement is broken up and then one of the parties would like to claim maintenance. And then they want to claim for that standard of living that they would have had if they got married. But at that point during the engagement, there's no such legal duty to support each other. There's no legal responsibilities or, binding them together at that point. So you can't go and claim for what you would have had before this actually happened. So you can't also just, claim for maintenance as that duty didn't exist yet.
Yeah, because you weren't actually married, George. Just very quickly, as we wrap up our conversation this morning, must gifts be returned after the engagement has been called off?
So another contentious question, because, you're looking at engagement rings that cost a lot of money. And what if that person who got the ring broke off the engagement due to some unfortunate circumstances? So they were at fault. Do they get to keep that engagement ring, or do they have to bring it back? So again, unfortunately, the law, there's nothing set in stone, and you have to look at the circumstances. So we'll have to look at who broke off the engagement and the reason for breaking it off, the duration of the engagement, and then again, try and settle this aspect between the couple, get together and say, this is unfortunate, but I would like to have the ring back, or be compensated for the ring, for example. And when we look at that, it's the gifts, the type of gifts that you can maybe claim back, is we're looking at the type of gifts that will indicate the seriousness of the engagement, that promise to get married. So, for example, the engagement ring. That's a symbolic gift given to say that we are going to get married. So it doesn't include all the gifts. You have to look at the significance of the gift, and again, the consequences, and what was agreed upon at the beginning, and try and settle it. It is possible to go to court, and the court will have to make a decision at the end of the day. But as I said, the whole law and the whole legal aspect of an engagement seems to be changing quite a lot in the past few years, being a bit more relaxed and not that legal heavy with the consequences as well.
Absolutely, George. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Welcome, William.
That's George Pelser. He is the head of legal research at LegalWise. Of course, if you'd like to join LegalWise, you can SMS the word join to the number at the bottom of your screen right now. As we take a quick ad break, we'll be back with lots more here on The Morning Show on E! Stay with us.